Okay, I think we are ready. Hello, everybody. I'm actually sitting down today, and I wonder if this is going to work or not. So welcome to Sunday night. I'm Dr. Bosworth. This is Sunday night from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we are a little bit tardy tonight, but thank you for being patient. We do have a really great show for you tonight. And I just want to start by saying thank you for tuning in. I have a couple of thanks for Dave Murphy giving me a thumbs up on the sound and looking good. Have had my fair share of hiccups with the beginning. So you might notice that there are some peacock feathers behind me. It's a reminder for a couple things I wanted to cover tonight. And I have a subject that we've been working on for, I don't know, since I was in Hawaii. So that's got to be 5 months, but it's not as easy to educate without some good animation. I want to give a big hats off to my helper, Jack, who's been using his skills to help my skills look better. So big thank you to Jack. We're going to start out the show like we do pretty much every week, which is a check of numbers. And then getting into a few other announcements as I check. I'm just opening my ketone strip here. Usually they come in a bottle, but one bottle came with a whole bunch of sealed strips in them. I don't know, I must have clicked the wrong one or something. But I will start the show checking out numbers, not because I'm any more excited about pricking my finger than anybody else, but to show you that checking numbers is how you're actually on the ketogenic diet, that the food that goes in isn't as important as the chemistry, and the only way you know that is by checking. So I will click on or add a ketone. It's counting down from 10 seconds, and then the glucose only takes about 5 seconds. Please, oh, sweet. I was like, please have enough blood. Please have enough blood. All right, so that ketone is only 1.1, which is, but that is in ketosis, and my glucose is 84. And I will, if all goes right, check this again at the end of the hour just to show you some of the things that I like to do. So I'm going to just go back to one of my oldest and first ketone supplements. This is the raspberry lemonade. And it is, again, the reason I did this was I had my patients and students, if you would, using supplements to get through a hiccup, something that wasn't going so well. And so I'm just going to put this in here and sip on this while I give you the message tonight. But I had my own money that I spent on plenty of ketones, as well as was asking patients to do that. And boy, that did give me a lesson in be careful. These aren't all the same. So the other thing that I try to do is to show you that if your numbers don't get better when you take these supplements, get a different supplement. That's why I stepped over this threshold. I talk a lot about this in the online course that just shows you the places where I use the help of a supplement and then know that this is not intended for a difficult time. And hopefully you can see the end in sight by looking at your numbers and progressing through the keto continuum. All right. So there's a couple things that I was just going to start with some other announcements. So many of you have been filled with grace and generosity of prayers and well-wishings, as I am definitely grieving about my mom. One of the reasons I was choosing to sit today is I thought maybe my pants would get into the cut. That did not work out. They're peacock pants, which is why the peacock feathers are behind me. So as anybody who's watching the show knows, that I lost my dad in June, and it's been 3 weeks since my mother died, and it is awful. It's awful. I can't wait for the time to stop when I wake up and forget that she's not there when I go to text her. It's just a journey. But one of the things she left behind, wasn't planning on, but we'll get through it, is a live peacock. Okay, she lived on a real farm, and my sweet mother has, at 76, did several things since Dad died, like learned how to run a skid loader. And if anybody knows how to run it's not like a steering wheel. You have like gears and lifts. And she is amazing. But one of the things she was doing was keeping the farm going and all the stuff that happens on a real life farm. And her little dog is now at our house and figuring out what a grieving dog looks like. But she's got this stupid peacock. I don't know how to keep a peacock alive and when you're not right there. Anyway, so this past week, some of the peacock feathers made it to my house, and my mother bought me these crazy pair of pants, when we bought them, we thought of my mother, which was about 6 months ago, because she has a peacock, and they're peacock pants. But so maybe before the show's over, I'll try to show you my peacock pants in honor of my mother. Just trying to find ways to grieve and learn how do you get through difficult times. So in other news, I have had some really great collaboration from some very talented people to help me get this final combing of the book that goes with the online course. Again, the online course was never supposed to be this standalone. It kind of feels that way if you bought the online course. I talk about the book that's coming. I mean, there's plenty of handouts that are in the online course, but there was always this book coming that I had thought I'd have done by July, but I wasn't planning on my dad's funeral and helping my mother grieve, and I sure as heck wasn't planning on her death. So I'm close. I have audio recorded which is, if you've ever written or audio recorded a book, that's the absolute final edit, is by the time you record, you're like, this is truly what, I'm not going back, I'm not changing anything. But it is, it's something, I talk about my mom in the book a lot, so it's another layer of grieving. And just want to say thank you for everyone who has taken time to watch her eulogy. For anybody else out there who's buried people during this COVID journey, my dad's funeral was in the summer, so we just had everything out at the farm. We had family that was able to come, and we just all were outside, but my mother's wasn't. And it's hard. It's really hard. That process of just having the heaviness of your heart while you're trying to do something with your brain. I'll tell you, I've had my fair share of ketones in the last month, concentrating as I record the book, but also looking at some of the edits that I didn't think I needed to do, but you go to read it out loud and clearly I needed to edit some more. So I've used the ketones myself, trying to keep my Dr. Boz ratio under 40 while I'm recording the book. With my first book, I actually fasted for 8 days, and I'll tell you, there's just no way I could do that right now. I'm so proud that I made it 36 hours last week. And for those of you that have been following me, I've been fasting for a couple of years, every week for a couple of years. And happens in the seasons when life doesn't go well. And you say, well, how do I not fall all the way off the wagon? How do I journey through this? And I like to use the Sunday night shows as a way where I get to give a great lesson about what it is I want my patients to know. There's a lot of selfishness on this show that I record lectures that I want my patients to watch so that they don't have to try and learn it in a 20-minute visit with me. But I also try to use this as a real life example that it's real patient stories I'm trying to relate to on the show and to use as teaching tools. So this teaching tools from me that when you're going through a slump and it's feeling heavy and want to try and find a performance that you're proud of still, how you fuel your brain matters. So hang in there. I really do think I'm going to have the book for sale by the first. I was hoping the last week in November, but I'm still reaching for that. And as long as I keep going, I think I'll be okay. But somebody asked, when does the class start? So the class is an online class. I rolled it out when I got stuck in Hawaii in COVID. So if you go to bozmd.com/shop, you'll see that it's there for sale. There are some things that I think any of the students that have taken it will get to be a part of coming the first of the year. So I'm looking forward to sharing all that as I get the book done. because the book is really the backbone for where that course came from. So I think that's all my announcements. And I was going to, all right, so tonight's lecture, I will click on here, and then I think if I print, I think I've got one thing wrong. What do I have to do to make that play? Okay, there we go. All right, here we go. So we are talking about mitochondria. Okay, this, I am really excited about this. First of all, as I grieve, it's a great mental distraction to get really geeky about the things that I care about. And how energy changes on the ketogenic diet is very cool. I mean, hopefully you feel that way by the end of this lecture. So this is a picture of a mitochondria. And this lecture is going to be on the difference between healthy mitochondria. We're going to have this for about 20 minutes. I get lots of people that write in saying, would you do a shorter format? And just, you know, we do clip these out and put them in a shorter segment that doesn't have the social stuff at the beginning and some of the questions at the end. But I had really great feedback from all of you when I took time in the last couple of sessions to take your questions at the end of the hour. And I just really want to reward you for sticking around and watching the show and answer your questions then. So let's go with, here is a healthy looking mitochondria. And when you look at what should you get out of a mitochondria, it is your energy. It is the place where your body turns hydrogen and carbon and oxygen into energy. So when you hear people who say, I've been on the ketogenic diet and I feel so much better, what they're really saying is, my mitochondria are healing. And they probably aren't saying that, but that's what's happening to help them feel better. So this is a cell, and I actually put a bunch of mitochondria on this cell. They're even smaller than they are in this picture, but the central part of that dark part is the nucleus. The outer part is the mitochondria hangs out. And all these mitochondria are your furnaces. They're the energy for your fuel or for your cell. So your brain cells have a bunch of them. Your heart cells have a bunch of them. Your red blood cells have mitochondria. Yeah. So to make them better visible, I just grew them and blew them up because they're really small to begin with and hard to see. But we're in on one of these mitochondria, and I really can't help but point out again, this is a beautiful, perfect mitochondria. This one is pristine and healthy, and I just want you to notice that it's kind of plump looking, and there's lots of those wavy lines, kind of those internal folds inside here. And that is what gives you the platform for creating and supplying the body with lots of energy. Now, when you have these beautiful, healthy mitochondria, you can add some glucose and get fuel. You can add ketones and get fuel. And you can add some fat to get fuel. All of them go into the mitochondria, and they donate their carbons and hydrogen molecules. You add some oxygen, and you get energy. So let's unpack that a little further so that you have a bit of understanding about which type of situations would you have lots of energy, and which ones would you have a lower amount of energy. And then I'm hoping by the end you'll see why you should care, because you should care. You should care. When people say, geez, Dr. Boz, I've been watching you for a while and your skin looks younger, you look more youthful. What you really are saying is, you're minding them and produce better energy with less mistake than they used to. And that's real. So this box is just kind of magnifying that edge of the mitochondria, which is where the real action takes place. So there is that green line drawing is a membrane of the mitochondria, and the inside membrane is called the membrane. So that space between the outer membrane and the internal membrane is actually what matters. That's where this magical thing happens. When electrical current or energy isn't flowing in that space, you're dead. This is life, where your life exists, where the magic spark of, take Frankenstein and build all these different cells and molecules. You have to still get the life, the energy, the electrons to flow in this little space. And if you don't do that, there's no life. That's what you need for life. So these electrons, I'm going to represent by little e's, and you can see in this healthy patient, the electrons are being created in that space. So that's going to be important as we go forward. All right, so here's our cell again. Here's our little mitochondria. We're going to start this part of the lecture, or this part, with glucose. So glucose is carbs. When I'm drinking this, I'm drinking ketones. So this is not sugar. They're the glucose molecules that show up in your blood are there whether or not you eat an apple or applesauce. They are from carbohydrates almost universally. There's other ways you can get them, but for the most part, glucose comes from eating carbs. Inside the mitochondria, don't blink, here's what happens. So glucose goes to pyruvate. Pyruvate then turns into acetyl-CoA, and there's this wonderful little process called the Krebs cycle. And that's where energy turns, and these little electrons slide an internal membrane and outer membrane, and you get most of the energy, almost 90% of the energy when glucose comes in is out through those little two membranes at the end of the Krebs cycle, or at the end of the electron transport chain. When you pay attention to what else is needed for this to happen, you're going to need some oxygen. So oxygen is when oxygen comes in, when you breathe oxygen in and you exhale carbon dioxide and water, which is, we call this respiration when a mammal, respiration when the cell adds to the glucose and it comes out as carbon dioxide and water. So the cell is respirating when it's making good energy, and in this case, out of glucose. So some other things that I like to point out, if you look at glucose coming into the body, again, glucose to pyruvate is the first little step inside that mitochondria, and it does go into acetyl-CoA and turn into the Krebs cycle. And those electrons flow down. But what I want you to see there is, as you're turning glucose into energy, those electrons have this very specific pathway, and that is where the energy comes from. It is also, if you don't have oxygen present, if you just don't have enough delivery of oxygen, this happens in the human body a lot. Whether you're sprinting and you kind of used up all the oxygen right away, or in people that aren't healthy, they just have a lower oxygen delivery. And that lactic acid is something you can measure in the body. When Grandma Rose was on a ventilator and sick, this is something they follow to see, are we giving enough oxygen for her cells to stay matching her needs. And when lactic acid started to rise, it was a sign that she was not getting enough oxygen through her lungs to properly produce energy for her body. So the key there that I want you to really focus on is, when you ferment something, when you have no oxygen, especially important with cancer cells. So they are doing this in the absence of oxygen, but you can still use glucose it will make lactic acid that gives you some energy. And you also use, there we go. You also use, and notice how these arrows are tiny. There's not a lot of energy that comes out of them. That's why I made them small. So that acetyl-CoA, into succinic acid, just tiny little percentages of the fuel will be turned into energy, as compared to the massive amount of fuel that comes when you put glucose into a cell. All right, so let's move on to a different fuel. Here's again our beautiful cell with our beautiful mitochondria, and we have that big oxygen molecule there to remind you this is in the setting of oxygen, high oxygen state. And these are our ketones. So our ketones show up. They show up in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, And BHB is what the supplements are. When people order exogenous ketones, they're ordering beta hydroxybutyrate, and it is beta hydroxybutyric acid is really what it is, but they put it with some salts and it turns it into a powder form. And as long as they don't put a whole bunch of other stuff in there, they should all be equal. But they're not. So that's why you measure. You should, when I pricked my finger and I showed you my ketones, I was measuring what are my beta hydroxybutyric acid molecules in that drip of blood. And then it deciliters, millimoles per deciliter is what the units are for that one. All right, so here's what happens. No, yeah, these are when you buy products, you're buying BHB. That's the point here. Some people miss that point. What is a supplement? Oh, it is energy. You are trying to get your ketones, your mitochondria, your furnaces to burn this fuel that has a higher output of energy when using glucose versus when using ketones. Now, that 89% actually should be higher. I see I left that on there. When you put fuel into a cell and it uses ketones, it's in the setting of oxygen where you're respirating the cell. That process of turning those carbons and hydrogen into energy, you get more energy out of a carbon for carbon, more energy out of a ketogenic state than you do a glucose state. The math on that gets a little wonky. We are going to have this as a couple part series, so I'll go into that next week. But as you look at the third thing that we're going to look at here, again, oxygen setting here, beautiful mitochondria. These are fats. And if it looks like these fats, it's because they do. These are short or medium chain fats. So when you hear MCT or medium, specifically 10 carbons or less, 8 carbons or less, those are the kind of fats that can go right into a Krebs cycle into your mitochondria without the help of a molecule called carnitine. What I'm just saying is it's easy. Your body takes those fats, it turns them into acetyl-CoA again, and you're going to see it spin into energy just like you did with a ketone, just like you did with glucose. The efficiency for burning short and medium chain fats is stacked on top of the efficiency of absorbing those fats, not needing to digest them. Medium chain triglycerides are unique in the ketogenic diet. I mean, you can have them in any diet, but they're especially get the spotlight because you do not need pancreatic enzymes to absorb them. You don't need bile salts, bile from your gallbladder and your liver to absorb them. And they are quickly converted into ketone energy. And this is exactly where it happens. So those electrons that floated along and created that energy at the end is, again, very efficient for the system to supply, turn those carbons into energy. All right. This is what the fats look like when they don't have their legs cut off. These are long chain fats. And long chain fats are also very useful and used a lot on the ketogenic diet. They would be things like butter, lard. Butter has some short chain fats in it, but mostly it's long chain fats. So that carnitine is how the fats get in. That's really important for carnitine is very high in meat products, so it's usually in the foods you're eating. And I just want you to see these beautiful troops. These electrons are floating along that outer membrane and out to patients, but also pointing out how powerful it is that a body does that. It is never a higher level of focus for me than when I'm talking to somebody with dysfunctional mitochondria. When I talk about mitochondria, people's eyes glaze over. So I've tried to make these as animated and as cartoonish because this is the reason that my sweet mother, who did not make it through her COVID challenge, but she had a chance. And it is because of the power that she had a mitochondria looked like this one in this slide at the beginning of her 71st year of life. Her mitochondria were, can you see how they're kind of, it's like deflated, like a football that's not all the way full anymore. It's also, notice the folds that are in that mitochondria. They're no longer delicate and multiple, you have just a few folds inside this mitochondria. This is a dysfunctional mitochondria. And there are lots of symptoms that when I'm speaking to a patient, or I've known them for years, I can see their mitochondria get worse and worse and worse and worse. And the worst, but she'd also had prediabetes from all of the weight that she put on from chemo and all the things that came with her 10 years of life. When patients' memory isn't working right, it's their mitochondria that are really in the crux of how do we get them better? How do you help them? Depression, again, another place where doesn't take long. If you Google depression and ketogenic diet, you'll see, wow, I can't believe how many of my patients have gotten off of their antidepressants that they thought they would never get off of. Drink ketones for a week and get off them. They actually had about where the brain got better. And what am I really saying? I'm saying the mitochondria in their body improved the longer they were in a state of steady ketosis, steady nutritional ketosis. Bipolar disorder is associated with dysfunctional mitochondria. Muscle weakness, again, how strong and how much energy you can transfer into the cell is related to what happens inside that furnace, inside that campfire. That is your mitochondria. How much life can you string out of these carbons of fuel and make your body go, make your brain go? Multiple sclerosis is near and dear to my heart. Midwest is known for having these elevated latitudes. The further you get away from the equator, the more likely multiple sclerosis is to hit. And it is a dysfunction of their mitochondria, that they weren't born with it, but they do grow their mitochondria to be deflated and having less folds. Essentially, they cannot turn carbons into the energy of life as efficiently, and their body starts to their mitochondria within certain cells start to shut down, specifically those in the brain. Thyroid problems, Parkinson's, respiratory problems, vision and hearing problems, increased risk of infection, autism and autism-like features, all have been linked to the number of folds in the mitochondria and how abundant they are. We're going to show you in just a second, just making sure I finish reading out that list. Those seizures, strokes, and migraines, and heart, liver, and kidney diseases have all been, their research winds in and out of that mitochondria lab because of the link. When the mitochondria doesn't work right, all of these things, not just worse, there's some evidence to say they are starting, you can't have them when the mitochondria was plump and full of lots of folds. And in my medical career, we've had the notion that, well, once that's gone, once you have the dysfunctional mitochondria, you can't get them back. And that is one of the great things about the research today, showing us we can improve these symptoms. It's hard. You have to stay in a state of ketosis. You have to have a tribe of people helping you through this. I would contend that's the whole point of me writing this book and this online course, is to create tribes of people, not to put you on a monthly subscription plan to no, this is not that hard. You need a tribe. You need a group of people that are helping all to improve, and use a curriculum with evidence-based guidance on how do you do that. And that's really what I've done inside that lecture, but also inside that online course. All right, so here's a couple of mitochondria. One is healthy, one is not. I'm trying to put this side by side to say, what's the difference? Okay, notice the plumpness versus the deflated mitochondria. And notice the number of, what's really important is to notice what happens in the time when the energy's fixture. So you can just see, okay, the shape and size and the folds are different. I want you to notice the size is about 2/3 as big as a healthy one. So overall, when you look at biopsies of autistic brains, they have mitochondria that are smaller. The other thing is, again, the less folds, which is less energy that's created. It is in that little space of life that we see the conversion into energy. Our carbon and hydrogen gets converted into energy. And again, that's less plump. So if I didn't say that, that's where I was trying to make sure I said it. And finally, the energy leaks out through these cracks. I don't know if you, the artist, I know I need there to be breaks, that the mitochondria is not efficient. And at first he drew it with breaks on the outside of the cell. I mean, no. Inside the cell, that internal membrane that's winding around, it's not efficient. It's made of, it's got trans fats in the lipid layer. It's stiff. It's not flexible. It's broken, but it is fixable. All right, then healthy mitochondria can use ketones and glucose as fuel. So here's our dysfunctional mitochondria. Here's a pretty picture of it. We're just going to take that shiny layer off so you can just see inside it a little better. And then we're going to plop that mitochondria. Oh, actually, I'm going to zoom it in just to make sure you see this crack, this broken part is not the outside of the mitochondria. It is this little part that's waving inside the cell. And that's where it wastes your energy. Where does all the energy go? Doc, I'm eating. I've got all this glucose. I've got a high blood glucose. Why don't I feel like I have good energy? And I'm like, it's for this reason. Oops, this reason. Okay, so here's our little mitochondria. We're going to tuck it inside our cell again. And again, this is in the cytoplasm. The central part is that nucleus. And we're going to blow them up so you can see them because they are really tiny. This is a very super cyber level of mitochondria there. All right, so now let's zoom in, and here's your mitochondria. Here's the one that you can see the cracks on it. And we're going to say, well, what happens when we have mitochondria? I have swirly rainbow happening on my, let's try that again. Danger of getting too much animation on a slide. All right, so here we go. There's cytosol. Cytosol is the outside of the cell. The mitochondria is the internal part of that cell. So those are the same. Just like they did in healthy mitochondria, they're going to take glucose to pyruvate, and your Krebs cycle is going to try and do exactly what it does. But in this case, as it starts to convert that energy into the substrates that will travel throughout which is the basic fuel of life, and how can we turn it into good energy? And when the mitochondria is dysfunctional, these electrons get outside the cell. And what is an electron that's outside the cell, that's not, or outside the mitochondria, that's not being used as energy? That is a free radical. That is that's oxidative stress. So if you go back to that list of problems where I said, look, this happens in cancer, this happens in dementia, depression, bipolar, autism, multiple sclerosis, muscle weakness. You're like, okay, that's a lot of problems that are just, they're all chronic in nature. They all don't get, you can't like body healthier. And I'm trying to improve their mitochondria. So they'll come in and say, well, last time we were at the clinic, I read the notes afterwards and there were antioxidants. So I went out and I bought some fish oil. And I said, okay, how much fish oil are you taking? And they'll say, oh, 3 or 4 pills. And at this point, I just want to like put my hands in my head and say, if this is what your mitochondria look like, the mitochondria ones, you're up a creek without a paddle. You will never be able, you could bathe in fish oil and still not have enough fish oil that gets to the level of the mitochondria to counteract these electrons. When electrons are, they're zinging around the inside of the cell, if they run into the nucleus, they can break the DNA. And that's where, when we say, hey, if you have the breast cancer gene, don't turn it on. You've heard me say that before. If you have the Alzheimer gene, don't turn it on. And you're like, okay, I don't want to turn it on. How do I turn it on? How do I not turn it on? And you don't make electrons. You don't have rogue electrons zinging around your body. That is a natural part of aging, but your system is designed to make up for a few of them, just not a bathtub full of them. The more electrons that zing out, these are coming out a wasteful mitochondria, the more unhealthy patients get. And it looks like aging. I have people say, I just thought my brain was foggy because I finally hit 55. I'm like, No, that's not the plan. If you want a brain at 55, um, it really is about reversing age. And that comes with this steady process of how can you take a human body, like my dear mother, 71 years old, she was overweight, and had been putting that weight on for the better part of 5 or 6 years, maybe even a decade, from chemotherapy, from cancer of her white blood cells. And it was not like one day she woke up and she looked old. It was this gradual, but more rapid than it should have been, process of aging. And if you could have had a spotlight on her mitochondria, you've seen these free radicals out bouncing around. What I didn't know then, but I do know now, is had she cut the carbs to 20 or less, followed the process of really being in a state of ketosis, uh, she would have seen those mitochondria heal up and return to a healthier state. They want to be healthy. I'm just going to wind that up really quick and then we'll take your questions. When I look at the message I'm trying to do, and we will stack this as a part 1, part 2, and probably part 3 for wrapping up what mitochondria have to do with getting healthier and in a ketogenic state. This process of improving your health is slow, steady, but it does require a beginning. And I think that's where, when I look at folks with the most dysfunctional mitochondria, they have multiple of those problems. They've had not just prediabetes, not just high blood sugars, they've had diabetes for years. They have a problem list that's got several illnesses. They come to an internal medicine clinic because they do need somebody thinking about the long game. How can we take them to a healthier phase of life? And it really isn't going to happen with all those prescriptions. Those prescriptions are to help you not to get worse. And I use them. They are a part of medicine today. They make my job much better because I can't offer that as a bridge until we get these mitochondria healthier. Time my mother started the process when she was 71, she died at 76. The only thing she was on at the end of her life was a small dose of thyroid, which had probably dropped by 70% of the dose. And, I said, when life calms down, when she wasn't taking care of Dad, who was sick at the end of his life there, we'll recheck your thyroid. She wanted off of it. I'm like, okay, just calm down. We'll get to that. We never did. The process of improving a mitochondria, though, is slow. It's slow and steady. And we'll have next week's slides just to show you a little bit more what I mean when rogue electrons hit that cellular level and they scatter. Those processes turn into a more rapidly aging patient than they should be. In a year, the time aged a year. But when their mitochondria had a lot of electrons floating out of it, they aged even faster. So, all right. Now that brings to the end of the conclusion for this part of the message. What I want to do now is actually take time, because there are a lot of you that write into the channel asking questions, saying, when will you take? And when I first launched the online course, I had a series of questions. All the neurons, we posted a way to get your questions answered, and I actually spoke for 2 hours just answering questions that had to do with that section of the class. So it wasn't just random questions like we're going to get here today. They were very if you're in the first week of a ketogenic diet and you're wondering what do other people struggle with, that we look at. Once you get an online course and you start to look at it, you think, oh, I could have done that better. Oh, I could have added to that. And those are some of the things that I plan to continually augment the course, that it's not just stagnant. I think that's the beauty. Unlike a book where once you're done, it's out there, it's in print, you're going to have to revamp it, rewrite it, write another version. But a journey that happens in an online course is you get to improve the process by updating those videos and really improving the content by notching each one up every time you improve one of those videos. All right, so all right, let's take on a few questions here. I'm going to put the chat up here in just a second. All right, so Lee Clark writes in. I'm going to read his question out loud. Can you improve your mitochondria enough to use up and recycle your LDL cholesterol, your bad cholesterol, enough on the keto diet to get it under 100? So let's just take that for a second. So his question is there. I think it might still be online. Maybe I didn't quite click it fast enough there. So Lee's question is, what he's saying is, I have this lipid panel and my LDL cholesterol is above 100. I want it to be lower than 100. And I'm saying you might not, if the reason you want your LDL cholesterol lower is to lower your risk of a heart attack. He's clearly watched the other videos, because I talk about LDL when it cannot recycle through the liver, when it gets stuck in circulation. Those LDL particles are different the longer they stay stuck in circulation, the longer they can't recycle through your liver. So when he's saying, can I do this enough to recycle my LDL and get it below 100? And I wouldn't want my LDL cholesterol, my total cholesterol or LDL cholesterol, to be anywhere close to 100. Cholesterol is the fuel that you are delivering to the body. What I don't want it stagnant. I don't want a liver full of triglycerides that I can't use. I don't want a fatty liver. I don't want a liver full of glycogen that I never empty. So the way that you can monitor that is what I did at the beginning of this, which is prick your finger in the morning, first thing in the morning. The reason we have you prick it first thing in the morning is because the noise from those there's data, and then data is not perfect. It's especially a home monitor. It has variables, but you're going to take out the variables the most by checking it first thing in the morning. Try to get it before you go to the toilet, like really stick first thing in the morning. And what you're measuring is what's happened throughout the night, and first thing, before you start making coffee and getting up and, today I brushed my teeth and then I check my ketones, or I check my glucose and ketones. Try not to do that. Try to keep the variables minimal by checking it at the same time every day. And what you're really looking at is not one number, but over time, your glucose numbers should go from, just guessing, you're in the 90s, or maybe you're even at a morning glucose of 100. It should get into the 80s, then into the 70s, and you should actually find a morning fasting glucose somewhere between 65 and 80. That's normal. You'll see the glucose slow to change, but the ketones will start to rise. And this is why we have people check both. Glucose and ketones together allow us to see what's happening inside the chemistry of this patient. And the change for improving the body, improving how cholesterol is being delivered, how cells are repairing, how the energy is being put into your body and then dished out to the ones that need it, you can measure that. And that is glucose, ketones, first thing in the morning. I put a ratio on it so that it's even more less noise. A ratio is just going to take out some of the slight variabilities that happen in glucose and ketones. And if you can get your Dr. Boz ratio, which is taking glucose, dividing by ketones, and there's all kinds of videos on that out there. If you can get that number under 100 every day for 6 months, first thing in the morning, you will have a continued, you'd have a whole new liver. Your liver would not have stored glucose. It would not have stored fat in it. You would have used those resources. And if you're saying, well, how do I do that? There is the name of my book that's coming out is called Keto Continuum. And it is taking you from not in a ketogenic state, and it is going to march you through, what do I do with my patients in the clinic? How do I help them go from a life of standard American eating to a consistently consistent ketosis? And that process isn't something I can do in a soundbite. It's really step by step. And then where you're stuck, you're not alone. First of all, I'm sure there's a patient on that also has lots and lots and lots of the same problems that can happen again. And that collaboration, that understanding of what to do when you're in that moment is the purpose of creating a support group. All right, let's go to another question. Okay. Some really good comments in there. Okay, let's just see. So okay, so there is one from Trish. Wanting to see white blood cell count number decrease to lower inflammation and heart attack risk. So this is the path through mitochondria. Could you flesh that out? So what she's saying is, if you look at some of the other inflammatory markers, there are some risks for heart attack. There are elevated white blood cells can be a sign that you are in a higher inflamed state. And when you look at what would a mitochondria have to do with that, part of those electrons that are going out and destroying, they're rogue. They're not doing what they're supposed to. They're running into cell walls. They're running into the nucleus and into the DNA. They're pinging inside your heart. And when you change the way those mitochondria stop leaking, those cracks in the mitochondria mend. That's when you will find it's a removal of inflammation that you're doing when you do that. When people, the word inflammation is like, I don't know, the most popular word in medicine. I think it was after keto last year. What they're saying is chronic inflammation is what's wrong. Okay, that is the problem. This has been in my whole medical career. Why do people come to see an internist? Because they don't know that they have chronic inflammation. You say, well, how do you measure that? Okay, so you can measure a white blood cell. That's what that guest was asking. You can measure inflammatory markers for heart disease. That's all inflammation. But as a scientist, tell me what's going wrong inside their cells, and that has to do with what do their mitochondria look like, and how do they shuffle electrons from carbon coming from glucose and ketones into energy. It doesn't always work out as a way to explain that. And I usually never talk mitochondria with my patient about when she's saying, how do I get that healthier? How do I get those white blood cells down? The step number one is doing the inflammation by dropping your carbs to 20 or less per day. And in that process, replacing it with low carbohydrates. And in the process of doing that, you're going to have less meals per day. This doesn't happen the first week. It doesn't even happen the first month sometimes. But as I walk my patients from the beginning of this journey to about 18 months out, you'll find that they look young. I mean, one of the places that they really enjoy is what their family says to them. And it's about 4 to 5 months in, and they'll say, yeah, I've lost some weight, but it's this energy. It's the ability to, winter is long here in South Dakota, and it's, our sunsets are happening at 5 o'clock now. So it's dark, and there's a depression that can happen in the darkness of South Dakota. But the people who are fueled with ketones, not free. And it's those comments that I continually use as just the reason why would you want to do a ketogenic diet? What's the benefit? And in my mind, I instantly think of their mitochondria get healthier. And that translates into a whole bunch of symptoms that don't all turn into something people care about. But that's what they should care about. That's where the depression gets better. That's where their energy gets better. That's where their anxiety drops. That's where their sleep gets better. That's where the improvement in their health at a very subcellular level is happening in a state of constant keto. Let's see. I'm going to check my numbers while I'm looking for another question. Do that. These are the pants that, again, I have this crazy peacock I have to keep alive. My mother's death, when she was on the farm, she had a peacock. And now the peacock, I don't know, how much food does a peacock need in a week? Oh boy, I just jumped ahead now. I can't find John's question. Well, so coffee, so this is coffee, black coffee is really just a stimulant. There's no calories in it. There's no carbon to put through your mitochondria. So here's just the cue that I'm doing. It's that little blinking dot means that it's ready for testing. So coffee and mitochondria, if you look at, it does increase the rate of, it's a stimulant, so it does increase heart rate, it decreases appetite. All right, so that's what happened in an hour. 1.4 on the ketones, so it went from 1.1 to 1.4, and glucose dropped a little. I think it was in the 80s somewhere. Again, the reason I do this isn't because I enjoy pricking my finger anybody more than you guys do, but to show you that you are not in ketosis if you're not measuring. And the healthier you get, the less you have to do it as frequently. You don't have to prick your finger. I tell you to pee on a urine ketone strip. They're cheap, easy, portable, safe, and you don't have to deal with the anxiety of, I got to poke my finger, which isn't that hard once you do it, but it really is that there's enough things going on in the first few weeks of a ketogenic diet. Caffeine question. When looking at coffee, as long as you don't put cream in it and you don't put any sugar in it, if you're just looking at black coffee, there aren't any brain functions. It does suppress appetite. It does increase your heart rate, quicker thinking, higher heart rate, and the appetite suppression usually correlates to less food. So how does caffeine affect it? Not much in the way of the substrates that go through it, but in general, your energy demand is a little higher on caffeine because of the increased heart rate. I've never thought about that question. That's a good one. All right, that's enough for tonight. That's an hour. And again, we will clip this down to shorter segments and we'll put it together with the ones coming up the next couple of weeks. Again, I really appreciate all of the condolences and the